As
I'm ready to leave now. I mean, that's
yes,
pretty good.
As I mentioned earlier, I have seen Yom Kippur services less well attended than this crowd at the historic 69th Synagogue. Hi, good to see you again.
Good to see you, Bob.
In the book, as Brad Graham very well summarized, you write about lessons that you've learned from a life both in public service and also in private life. And you write about, as we'll get to later, your experiences as Secretary of State and the beginning of the Iraq War and what happened. But I want to begin with one of the rules, one of your 13 rules, originally published in Parade magazine. This is the 13th and the last. Perpetual optimism is a force multiplier. Reading you, I find you the most optimistic person I have read in a long time. Don't you get the decline out there and what's going on?
It's very important that that rule had to be the summary of the 13 rules. And it links to the first one also that says, you know, things will get better in the morning. And I start that description by saying that's not necessarily the case, but it's the attitude you should have. Things are going to get better. You're going to make them better. It is within your life to make things better. And then if you go through the rules and end up with perpetual optimism is a force multiplier. Force multiplier is a military term. We're always looking for ways to enhance the power of our force, whether it's by communications or supply lines or whatever it is. But we look for things that make the force more effective. And so I have found in working with human beings, and this book is all about working with human beings, I have found that if you as a leader or a manager convey an attitude of perpetual optimism, we can do it, we can do it, then that will infect an entire organization and it becomes a force multiplier. They can do more than they thought they could do. I also, coming to Robert's real question, as I go around the country, I see all of the problems that are discussed here in Washington so very, very often. The unemployment rate, the fact that our economy is just starting to come back but not fast enough. The problem with overseas adventures that we have been involved in and other crises around the world. But I also see as I go around the country, people who are hard at work, people in business, and I talk to business leaders, financial leaders, mass audiences, I still find that people are optimistic about this country. They have confidence in who we are and what we are, and almost Reagan-like confidence among the people. And if there's one thing that's really bugging them, is that they sense that their leaders in Washington don't understand how much confidence and optimism is still out there, and they're waiting for the leaders in Washington to cut through the Gordian knots of conflict and lack of compromise and get this country moving. And so I have always tried to be optimistic and convey an attitude of optimism, and I'm optimistic about this country. These are not the worst of times. Too many people forget, in my lifetime, for example, and in your lifetime, most of you, what it was like from 68 to 74. In 68, Bobby Kennedy was assassinated, Martin Luther King was assassinated, and buses were put around the White House that night, April 4th, to make sure the White House didn't get burned down. And then Bobby, Martin, Vietnam War, race riots, counterculture, drug problems, racial problems. And then a vice president resigned in disgrace. We had to come out of Vietnam. We didn't win that war. And then a president resigned in disgrace. And there was still a Soviet Union, and China, we weren't quite sure where it was heading at that time, but it was still a communist nation that was aligned against us. And yet, through all of that, we never lost hope or confidence. And then a wonderful man who I don't think gets sufficient credit, Jerry Ford, came on the scene as our president. Simple Midwestern values, people looked at him and they were reassured. And he brought us back. And then President Carter had some difficulties with the economy, but he moved it along. And then Ronald Reagan shows up and he says, it's sunshine morning in America. Here we go. And a few years later, it's the Soviet Union that's gone. It's China that's trying to become a world power, not by invading anybody, but by selling to us. And they've gotten pretty good at it. Just imagine where we are now compared to 30 years ago, where China is selling us stuff, and the money that we are paying them, they then loan us to buy more stuff. This is our economic problem, ladies and gentlemen. We've got to figure this one out. And so, yes, I'm optimistic. Americans have to be optimistic. It's what fuels us. It's what makes us Americans.
I didn't know until reading the book that an important text for you on the subject of confidence is the movie The Hustler.
The Hustler, yeah. Yeah.
What's so important about The Hustler?
The Hustler, for those of you who are not old enough to remember the movie, it's a movie about a pool hall. And Paul Newman goes by the name of Fast Eddie Felsen. And he's determined to be the champion. He thinks he's the best in the world. And he goes into this pool hall in New York. And he's going to play Minnesota Fats, who was played by Jackie Gleason. And so the game starts. And Fast Eddie is good. He's very, very good. But Minnesota Fats has this manager or financer who's sitting in a chair, George C. Scott, watching all of this. And as the evening goes on and they're drinking and shooting pool, Eddie's just beating the devil out of Minnesota Fats. And Minnesota Fats is becoming desperate, and he keeps looking to George C. Scott to get him, what do I do, what do I do? And Scott finally says to him, stick with this kid, he's a loser. And that kind of stuns everybody. And then they play some more. Minnesota Fats keeps losing. Eddie says, I got him, I got him. And then Minnesota Fats excuses himself, goes into the bathroom. He comes out a few minutes later, and he's reaching for his coat, they think. And as the attendant is about to bring his coat out to him, instead of taking his coat, Minnesota Fats just smiles and puts his hands out and has some talcum powder poured into his hands. And then he rubs the hands, he looks at Fast Eddie, he says, Fast Eddie, let's play some pool. And then he beats the devil out of him, of course. And Fast Eddie is crushed. So Minnesota Fats never gave up, perpetual optimism. He thought he could win, he did win, and he worked against Eddie Felsen's weakness. And as I say in the book, I love that scene. And many a day when I was in trouble, which was a frequent occasion during my public life, and I had to go testify before Congress or go face a hostile press. So help me, I would put my uniform on or my suit, and I would go into my restroom, and I would wash my hands, and I would look in the mirror, and I'd say to myself softly, Fast Eddie, let's play some pool. And then I would go.
But as you mentioned,
yeah, I never watched the last scene.
You don't watch the end of the movie.
No, because of course Eddie's Fast Eddie, and Paul Newman is the star of the movie. He has to beat Fats at the end. But I never watch it. I don't want to see that.
It's an interesting approach to, because you can turn it off early in that case. I want you to relate it. It's a very touching story that you described when you visited a Japanese school once. I gather a school full of kids who are really being prepared to succeed. And I want you to describe it.
It was a private Japanese school in Tokyo, and very intelligent, smart kids from well-to-do families. And I gave my speech to the students. I love talking to students. And I talk to them everywhere I go. And when I was through, questions were ready. And I noticed that kids were lining up with their little cards with their questions. Well, I don't like that because these are the questions the teachers have looked at and proved and made sure. And these are all the honor roll kids. And so I took a couple of them, and then I started looking out into the audience. Anyone else have a question? And a young lady in the back of the auditorium, where I used to hang out when I was her age, she raises her hand and she gets up and said, General, are you ever afraid? I'm always afraid. I'm afraid every day. Are you ever afraid? And I said, I'm afraid of something almost every day. And I fail at something almost every day, if not every day. And what you have to learn to do, my dear, is to understand that fear and failure are a normal part of human existence. And you have to learn how to control it. You will never defeat it, but you can manage it. So have confidence in yourself. Be optimistic that you can get out of the problem you're having. And if it's a failure, figure out what you did wrong and then correct it and move on. Take your failure, roll it up in a ball and throw it over your shoulder and forget about it. And then move on and see what's ahead. And the room was deadly still. And when I came away, I think everybody had that thought in their mind. Kids are afraid, and they have to be taught how to manage and overcome fear. It was the most moving moment for me. And if I could just digress for a moment, Robert, most of the book is like this. We'll get to the tough, hard chapters about my time as Secretary of State,